If someone had asked me that morning how I described my marriage, I'd have said comfortable. Not perfect, but steady. Like an old leather chair that creaks when you sit down, but still holds you up. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday. I remember because it was our anniversary, not a big one, not even one that came with a fancy dinner, but the kind we always marked with a small celebration. Lauren and I had a tradition. Take out from our favorite Thai place, a bottle of wine, and a movie neither of us would finish. That morning I texted her, "Happy anniversary. Dinner's on me tonight." No response. By lunchtime I figured she was busy. She always had a million things going on: work, yoga, catching up with friends. But as the hours ticked by, the silence started to feel heavier. When I got home, the house was dark. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I sat at the kitchen table, the smell of curry and pad thai filling the room, the candles I'd lit flickering on the counter. I stared at my phone, the little text thread with my message sitting there unanswered. When the clock struck 9, I called her. No answer. By 10, I wasn't angry. I was worried. I told myself she'd probably just lost track of time. Maybe she was out with her coworker Karen, the one she always joked about drinking too much wine with. That's what I told myself. But something didn't feel right. She came home around 11, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked in. Her smile was bright, her laughter just a little too loud, like she'd come from the kind of night you don't want to end. "Oh, shoot," she said, dropping her purse onto the couch. "I totally forgot. Happy anniversary, babe." I stared at her, my stomach sinking. Forgot. She'd never forgotten before. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice steady, trying not to sound accusatory. "Out with Karen," she said quickly. "She broke up with her boyfriend, so we did a little girls' night to cheer her up." I nodded, trying to process the excuse. But something about the way she said it felt off, too rehearsed, too quick. She didn't ask about the dinner I'd planned. Didn't even glance at the candles still burning on the counter. She just kicked off her shoes, mumbled something about being exhausted, and went to bed. I sat in the dark kitchen long after she was gone, the faint smell of wine trailing behind her. My mind replayed the moment over and over, trying to make sense of it. Maybe she really had forgotten. Maybe she really was with Karen. But then why did it feel like she wasn't telling the whole truth? The next morning, while she was in the shower, I checked her phone. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, but the unease from the night before hadn't gone away. Her messages were clean, too clean. No texts from Karen, no group chats, no sign of the usual chatter that filled her phone. Except for one, a single text from someone saved as Jay. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I put the phone back where I found it, my heart pounding. Last night was amazing. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Jay could be anyone, a coworker, a friend. But paired with the way she'd acted last night, it didn't feel innocent. Lauren had always been a smooth talker, quick with excuses and charming enough to make you forget why you were upset in the first place. But this wasn't something a quick excuse could fix. For the first time, I wondered if I really knew the woman I'd married. That night, she was more affectionate than usual, her kisses lingering, her tone sweet. She even brought home flowers, a gesture that should have made me happy, but instead made my stomach churn. I asked her again about her night out, casually slipping the question into conversation. She gave me the same story, word for word, her voice light and easy. But now I knew better. She thought I was blind, but I wasn't. Lauren was good at playing the part. She laughed at my jokes, kissed me on the cheek when I left for work, and texted me mid-morning updates about the little things that didn't really matter. But now I was seeing her through a different lens, and the cracks in her performance were starting to show. That night, as she curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling on her phone, I caught her smiling. Not the casual, distracted smile of someone watching a funny video, but something softer, more intimate. "Who's got you smiling like that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She glanced up, startled, her smile faltering. "Oh, just Karen?" She sent me the funniest meme about dating disasters. Her answer was quick, almost too quick. I nodded, watching as she turned her phone screen away from me and took another sip of wine. The next morning, while she was still asleep, I checked the phone again. "Jay." There were only a few messages, but they told me enough. "You're incredible. I haven't stopped thinking about last night. The smile you gave me when you walked in, unforgettable. Her responses were short, coy. Nothing incriminating, but just enough to feed his ego. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. She hadn't deleted the messages yet. That arrogance, her belief that I wouldn't notice, was like a slap in the face. At work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept circling back to those texts, to the way she had breezed into the house on our anniversary like nothing was wrong. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I trusted, was carrying on a second life right under my nose. I couldn't let it slide, but I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had more. That evening, I mentioned Karen casually, testing the waters. "How's Karen doing?" I asked over dinner. "She holding up after her breakup?" Lauren didn't even look up from her plate. "Oh, she's fine. Still figuring things out." I nodded, filing away her response. When she wasn't paying attention, I grabbed my phone and sent Karen a quick message on social media. "Hey, just checking in. Heard you had a tough week. Hope you're doing okay." Her reply came almost immediately. "Tough week? Not really. Everything's good. Why?" I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Lauren had lied. Later that night, while she was showering, I took my plan to the next level. I installed a small GPS tracker on her car, tucked under the rear bumper where she wouldn't notice it. It synced to an app on my phone, giving me real-time updates on her location. If she was sneaking around, I was going to catch her. The tracker didn't take long to pay off. 2 nights later, she told me she had a late meeting with a client at work. I nodded, feigning understanding, and kissed her goodbye as she left. The tracker told a different story. Her car stopped at a downtown restaurant, not at her office. I waited 15 minutes before driving over, parking a block away where I could watch the entrance. And there she was. She wasn't alone. Jay was younger than I expected. Tall, clean-cut, the kind of guy who looked like he spent his weekends at the gym. They sat by the window, laughing over wine and appetizers, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She leaned in close when he spoke, her smile soft and easy in a way I hadn't seen in years. I took a photo with my phone, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just a fling. This was deliberate. When she came home that night, she kissed me on the cheek, her lips cold from the night air. "Long meeting?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "So long," she said, kicking off her heels. "You wouldn't believe how exhausting it was." I nodded, watching as she walked into the bedroom, humming to herself. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I was blind. But I wasn't. Not anymore. The night after I watched Lauren laugh and lean into Jay like they were starring in some Hallmark movie, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hand on his arm, the tilt of her head, the kind of ease she hadn't shown around me in years. She thought she was playing me, thought her lies were airtight. But she didn't realize I'd stopped playing along. The GPS tracker became my lifeline. Over the next week, I followed every move she made outside the house. She claimed she was working late twice, out with Karen once, and meeting a potential client on another night. Each excuse was a lie. Her car didn't stop at her office or Karen's house. It went to Jay's place, a trendy apartment complex across town. She'd park in his lot for hours, and then she'd come home, smelling faintly of expensive cologne that wasn't mine. Each night, I added to my collection of evidence. Timestamps, screenshots of the tracker logs, and photos I took from my car, parked a safe distance away. Her texts with Jay became bolder. I found them in her deleted messages folder, tucked away as if she thought a simple swipe could erase the truth. "I can't stop thinking about you," he wrote one evening. "I miss you," she replied. It wasn't just physical. There was something emotional about the way she responded to him, something that stung even more than the betrayal itself. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was investing in someone else. The voice recorder I'd hidden in her car gave me even more. One afternoon, as I listened to her drive to Jay's, I heard her leaving him a voicemail. "Hey, I'll be there soon. Floyd doesn't suspect a thing. You're so much easier to talk to than him." My hand clenched around the phone, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to keep a clear head. By the end of the week, my folder of evidence was full. Photos of her car parked in Jay's lot, screenshots of their text exchanges, recordings of her lies. All of it damning, all of it undeniable. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make her feel the weight of every decision, Every excuse, every betrayal. That Friday, she told me she had a work dinner. I nodded, pretending to believe her. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and walked out the door like nothing was wrong. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place we used to go to on special occasions before she started making excuses. I parked a block away and watched from the shadows as she and Jay walked in together, hand in hand. They looked so at ease, so comfortable in their deceit, like two people who believed they'd never get caught. I took more photos, my chest tightening with every shot. When she came home that night, I asked her how the dinner went. She gave me the same smile she always did, wide and rehearsed. It was great, she said. Long, but productive. I nodded, hiding my disgust. I'm glad to hear that. She kissed me goodnight and went to bed, leaving me alone in the living room with my growing anger. Lauren thought she was untouchable, thought her lies were a fortress I couldn't break through. She had no idea the storm that was coming. Lauren's confidence was her Achilles heel. She had no idea I was watching her every move, no idea I'd unraveled the web of lies she'd spun so carefully. Each day that passed, I let her dig herself deeper, all while carefully laying the groundwork for what was coming. She thought she was in control. She was wrong. The next week brought more of the same lies. Another late meeting. Another catch-up with Karen. Another long sigh about how exhausting work had been. But now I didn't just listen. I recorded. Her conversations with Jay in the car, her voice soft and playful in a way I hadn't heard in years, filled the silence of my evenings as I played them back. You're the only person I can really talk to, she said once, her voice dripping with sweetness. Floyd just doesn't get me. Sounds like a boring guy, Jay replied. The anger that flared in me was sharp, but it didn't overwhelm me anymore. It was controlled, purposeful, because soon it wouldn't be me sitting alone with the weight of her lies. Her lies were unraveling elsewhere, too. I sent an anonymous text to Karen. Just a heads up, Lauren's been using your name as an alibi. Thought you should know. It didn't take long for Karen to respond. What the hell is this about? She texted Lauren. Lauren paced the living room that evening, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice high and defensive as she tried to smooth things over with Karen. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. Karen's name never came up again after that. Her work life took a hit next. Using the burner phone, I emailed her manager with screenshots of her tracker logs, photos of her out with Jay, and a brief message. Lauren Harper has been misusing work hours for personal reasons. This evidence speaks for itself. The fallout was immediate. Lauren came home that evening in a rage, slamming her purse on the counter. They're investigating me at work, she said, her voice trembling. Someone sent them something. Photos, accusations. Who would do that? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I don't know, she snapped, pacing the kitchen. But when I find out, they'll regret it. I almost smiled at the irony. Jay was the next target. Through social media, I found out he had a girlfriend, Jessica. Her profile was private, but I knew enough to piece things together. She got the same evidence I'd sent to Karen and Lauren's boss, with one extra line. You deserve the truth. The voice recorder in Lauren's car caught the fallout. Jay's voice was tense, clipped. Jessica knows everything. She's furious. I don't know how she found out. Lauren tried to soothe him, her voice desperate. It doesn't matter. We'll get through this. Easy for you to say, he snapped. I have everything to lose. Lauren's silence said everything. The cracks in her perfect little world were turning into chasms. Her friends were pulling away. Her job was on shaky ground, and her lover was slipping through her fingers. But she still had no idea the worst was yet to come. That Friday, she told me she was meeting an old co-worker for dinner. I nodded, smiling faintly. That sounds nice. Have fun. She smiled back, kissed me on the cheek, and left. I waited 5 minutes before grabbing my keys. The restaurant she picked was one I knew well, an expensive place we'd gone to for our anniversary years ago. Her car was already in the lot when I arrived, and I parked just far enough away to watch. She and Jay sat at a table near the window, their faces serious as they talked. I took more photos, documenting every moment of their interaction. But this time, I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was preparing for the final move. When she came home that night, I was sitting on the couch, a glass of bourbon in my hand. "How was dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Good," she said, kicking off her heels. "It's always nice catching up with people." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I raised my glass slightly, nodding. "I'm glad to hear it." She didn't notice the coldness in my voice. But soon she would. Lauren's confidence had always been her shield, but it was beginning to crack. The nights she stayed out late were fewer now, her excuses more rushed, her tone less convincing. She still believed she could juggle the lies, but I could see the weight of it all pressing down on her. And the beauty of it was, she didn't even know I was the one applying the pressure. The fallout from work hit her harder than I expected. That Monday, she came home early, slamming the door behind her and tossing her purse onto the counter. I was in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in paperwork, when she stormed in. "They demoted me," she said, her voice sharp, her hands shaking as she poured herself a glass of wine. I raised an eyebrow. "Why would they do that?" She glared at me, the glass trembling in her hand. "Someone's been spreading lies about me. They think I've been unprofessional during work hours." "Unprofessional how?" I asked, feigning confusion. She didn't answer, just downed the wine in one gulp and left the room. Her friends were distancing themselves, too. I'd sent the same photos and messages to a few key people in her social circle, carefully picking the ones I knew would gossip the most. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Lauren spent hours scrolling through her phone, staring at the texts that never got replies. She mumbled to herself about Amanda and Katie, about how they'd stopped answering her calls. "They're acting so weird," she said one evening, pacing the living room. "It's like they're avoiding me." I shrugged. "Maybe they're busy," I said, hiding my smirk. Her frustration was palpable, but she didn't press further. J2 was slipping away. The recordings from her car had become a treasure trove of tension and arguments. "This isn't working anymore," Jay said during one drive, his tone clipped. "Jessica is threatening to leave, and I can't deal with this right now." "Oh, so now it's my fault?" Lauren shot back, her voice rising. "You were fine with it when it was fun for you." "It's not fun anymore," he snapped. "It's a mess." Their fights were growing louder, their once flirty conversations now filled with blame and frustration. She didn't mention him at home, but I could see the stress in her posture, the way she flinched every time her phone buzzed. The final blow came with the finances. Lauren's spending had always been impulsive, designer bags, spa days, dinners out. But now, her credit card was declining, her shopping bags were fewer, and the tension in her shoulders was impossible to miss. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, staring at a bank statement. "Where's the money, Floyd?" she asked, her voice strained. I leaned back in my chair, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" She slammed the statement down on the table. "There's barely anything left in the joint account." "Did you move it?" I tilted my head, my expression calm. "I thought it'd be smart to protect our savings," I said, "given how things have been lately." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Protected from what?" I shrugged, letting the silence stretch between us. She didn't ask any more questions, but I could see her mind racing. By the end of the week, Lauren was a shadow of the woman she'd been. The arrogance, the confidence, the charm, it was all gone. She spent her nights on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, her glass of wine always full but untouched. She thought she was being punished by chance, by bad luck, by some cosmic coincidence. She still didn't know it was me, but she was about to. That Friday, I came home with a folder in my hand. Inside was everything: photos, texts, bank statements, voice recordings. It was the culmination of weeks of work, and it was time to lay it all out. Lauren was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. "Hey," I said, setting the folder on the coffee table in front of her. "We need to talk." She looked up, her brow furrowing as she glanced at the folder. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Go ahead," I said, gesturing to it. "Take a look." As she opened the folder and started flipping through the contents, her face went pale. Her hands shook as she reached the photos, the screenshots of her texts with Jay, the recordings of her lies. When she finally looked up at me, tears were streaming down her face. "You knew," she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my expression cold. For a long time, Lauren collapsed back onto the couch, the folder slipping from her hands. "What now?" she asked, her voice hollow. I stood, looking down at her with a calm I didn't think I'd feel. "You'll find out soon enough," I said. Lauren didn't move from the couch for what felt like an eternity. She sat there staring at the folder, her face pale and her hands trembling. Every now and then, she'd reach for the papers, her fingers brushing the damning evidence before recoiling, as if touching it would make it all real. But it was real, and she couldn't escape it. I left her in the living room, retreating to the kitchen to pour myself a drink. I didn't need to say anything else, not yet. I could feel the weight of the situation settling over her, the walls of her lies crumbling around her. When she finally spoke, her voice was faint, almost a whisper. "So, what happens now?" I walked back into the room, taking my time, letting the silence stretch between us. "You'll sign the divorce papers," I said, my tone even. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "Divorce?" "Floyd, wait." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "There's no waiting, Lauren. No fixing this. You didn't just cheat on me. You lied over and over. You made me question everything we built, everything I thought I knew about you. And for what? For someone who's already running for the door?" Her face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You planned this, Lauren. You lied to my face every single day. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident." She tried to plead her case, her words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "I was lonely, Floyd. You were always working, always too busy to notice me. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore." I crossed my arms, staring her down. "So, instead of talking to me, you found someone else to fill the gap. And now you're blaming me for it." Her silence was answer enough. The next morning, she tried to make amends. She woke up early, cooking breakfast for the first time in months. She smiled too much, spoke too sweetly, as if pretending everything was fine could undo the damage. I played along, keeping my responses short, my tone cold. When she finally sat down across from me, her smile faltered. "Floyd," she said softly, "please. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "You're not sorry for what you did," I said. "You're sorry you got caught." The rest of the week was tense. Lauren oscillated between anger, tears, and desperate attempts at reconciliation. She blamed work stress, our routines, her own insecurities, anything but herself. I let her flail. Every time she tried to convince me to reconsider, I pointed to the folder on the table. The evidence spoke louder than anything I could say. She stopped arguing after the third day, retreating into herself, the fight draining from her. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The final piece of the plan was already in motion. I'd contacted a lawyer weeks ago, outlining everything I'd discovered. The financial accounts were secure, the house deed already prepared for transfer. Lauren would leave with nothing but the consequences of her choices. I also reached out to Jay's girlfriend, Jessica. She'd been quiet after the first message I'd sent, but now she was ready to talk. We met at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral, public space where emotions couldn't spiral out of control. "I don't know why I'm here," she said as she sat across from me, her voice cold but curious. "Because you deserve to know the truth," I said, sliding the folder across the table. She opened it, flipping through the evidence I'd collected. Her face hardened with every page. "He said I was imagining things," she murmured, shaking her head. "He told me I was paranoid." "Sounds like a pattern," I said. When she looked up, her eyes were steely. "What are you going to do with all of this?" "Nothing," I said. "I don't need to. But I thought you might want the chance to decide for yourself." Jessica didn't say much after that, but the glint in her eye told me Jay's world was about to fall apart too. Lauren had chosen him over me, and now he was someone else's problem. That night, I placed the divorce papers on the dining room table. "Sign them," I said, my voice firm. Lauren stared at me, her tears long dried. "You're really doing this," she said. "I'm just finishing what you started," I replied. She picked up the pen with shaking hands, her signature shaky but legible. When she was done, she set the pen down and looked at me, her eyes hollow. "Where do I go?" she asked. "Not my concern," I said, standing. "Pack your things. You've got 2 days." Lauren thought she could manipulate her way out of this, thought she could charm her way back into my good graces. She thought wrong. Lauren spent the next 2 days packing in silence. The one smug, confident woman who had lied to my face, laughed behind my back, and thought she was untouchable had crumbled into someone unrecognizable. I watched her move through the house like a ghost, packing her things into suitcases and boxes. She didn't try to argue anymore. Her tears were gone, replaced by a hollow resignation. I didn't help. I didn't offer comfort. I just let her sit in the mess she'd created. On the final morning, she stood in the doorway with her bags at her feet. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face for something. Regret, forgiveness, anything that might mean she still had a foothold in my life. There was nothing left to give. "Floyd," she said, her voice soft, trembling. "I know you don't want to hear it, but I am sorry. For all of it." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her. "You're not sorry for what you did," I said. "You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." Her face crumpled, but she nodded. "I hope you'll be happy someday," she whispered. I didn't respond, just turned back to my coffee, letting her words hang in the air. She hesitated for a moment longer, then picked up her bags and walked out the door. When the door closed, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It wasn't lonely. It was liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The house felt different without her in it. The shadows she'd left behind were gone, replaced by a lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I walked through the empty rooms that evening, taking in the quiet and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The anger, the betrayal, the pain, it was all still there, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It had dulled into something I could live with, something I could use to move forward. Lauren was gone, and for the first time, I felt free. That weekend, I went through the house, getting rid of everything that reminded me of her. Her clothes, her decorations, the little trinkets she'd left behind. They all went into boxes, dropped off at the nearest donation center. It wasn't just about removing her presence from my home. It was about reclaiming my space, my life, my peace. The business became my focus. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects, expanding my client base, and building something that felt solid and real. Each completed job was a reminder that I was capable of creating something lasting, something meaningful. It wasn't just about making a living anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could rebuild, that I could thrive on my own. The world didn't stop for Lauren, either. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. She was keeping a low profile, avoiding the friends who had turned their backs on her after the truth came out. Jay was out of the picture, too. Jessica had made sure of that. It wasn't my concern anymore, and I didn't spend much time thinking about it. Lauren had made her choices, and she was living with the consequences. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with a glass of bourbon in hand, I realized something. For months, I'd been consumed by what Lauren had done, by the lies, the betrayal, the anger. But now, it didn't feel like it mattered anymore. She wasn't the weight I carried anymore. She was just the catalyst that had set me free. The days after Lauren left weren't what I expected. I thought I'd feel hollow, like the silence of the house would seep into me. But instead, there was clarity. The air felt lighter, the walls less oppressive. It wasn't that the pain of her betrayal had disappeared. It was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But now it wasn't in control. I was. Work became my therapy. I expanded my hours, took on more ambitious projects, and dove into the details like they were the only thing keeping me grounded. The satisfaction of building something real, of taking raw materials and shaping them into homes, spaces where other people's lives would unfold, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I started saying yes to projects I'd put off for years, renovations that pushed my skills, clients who wanted something extraordinary. Each success was a small victory, a reminder that I could create, even when my personal life had been reduced to rubble. Lauren wasn't entirely gone, though. She left traces. A receipt crumpled in the back of a drawer. A forgotten perfume bottle in the bathroom cabinet. The occasional bill or letter still addressed to her. Each one was like a spark of memory, sharp and unwelcome. But each time I found something of hers, I threw it out. This wasn't her space anymore. A few weeks after she left, I bumped into Amanda at the grocery store. She glanced at me with a mix of awkwardness and curiosity, like she wasn't sure if she should say something. Finally, she spoke. "Floyd," she said, her voice hesitant. I want you to know, I had no idea what she was doing." I shrugged, smiling faintly. "It's not your fault, Amanda. I'm not holding it against you." She seemed relieved, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "She's really not doing great," Amanda said after a pause. I nodded, saying nothing, because, honestly, I didn't care. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, staring at the stars. The quiet of the evening wrapped around me, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel lonely. I thought about Amanda's words, about how Lauren was struggling, and realized I didn't feel anything. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. She was just a part of my past. One weekend, I finally tackled the house. The furniture we'd picked out together, gone. The paint colors she'd insisted on, the muted, cold tones she claimed were modern. I painted over them with warm, earthy colors that felt like home. The old photos we'd hung on the walls, the ones that had once felt like proof of a life well lived, were boxed up and shoved into the attic. I didn't need them anymore. The house wasn't a shared space now. It was mine. Rebuilding wasn't just about the physical space, though. It was about finding myself again. I started going to the gym in the mornings, something I hadn't done since before we got married. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned over the years, woodworking, hiking, even fishing on weekends when the weather was good. And slowly, bit by bit, I started feeling like myself again. Lauren had spent years convincing me that I wasn't enough, that I worked too much, that I didn't notice her, that I wasn't present in the way she needed. But now, I realized that wasn't the truth. The truth was, she wasn't enough for me. One afternoon, as I worked on a new dining table in the garage, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from a client I'd recently worked with, Emily. She was sharp, kind, and had an eye for design that had impressed me during her renovation. "Hi, Floyd," the message read. "I know this is random, but I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime. Totally casual. Just wanted to thank you for the amazing work you did." I stared at the screen for a moment, a small smile tugging at my lips. I replied quickly, "Coffee sounds great. When and where?" That night, as I sat on the back porch with the stars overhead, I felt something shift inside me. The anger, the bitterness, the hurt, it wasn't gone, but it was no longer consuming me. It had become part of the story, part of what had shaped me, but it wasn't my whole story anymore. I was moving forward. Coffee with Emily wasn't just coffee. It was a glimpse into what life could feel like again. She was funny, sharp, and refreshingly straightforward. There were no pretenses with her, no games. Just honest conversation and genuine laughter. We sat at a small cafe downtown, sipping lattes and talking about everything from work to music to the quirks of small-town living. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone on such a simple, human level. When we said goodbye, she smiled, her eyes warm. "Let me know if you ever want to do this again," she said. I nodded, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "I think I'd like that." The days that followed felt lighter, freer. Work continued to thrive, the projects growing in complexity and scope. But now, there was something else, a new energy driving me forward. Emily and I started texting, casual at first, then more frequent. She had a way of making even mundane things feel interesting, her humor and curiosity pulling me out of the rut I hadn't realized I was still in. One weekend, I invited her to join me on a hike. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet trail I used to frequent before life got so complicated. We walked for hours, talking and laughing, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot and birdsong filling the gaps between words. At the summit, as we sat on a rock overlooking the valley, she turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You seem different," she said. "Lighter, maybe." "Ich glänzte her," surprised. "You can tell?" She nodded, smiling softly. "Whatever was weighing you down, it's not gone, but it's not holding you back anymore. Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. She was right. Lauren had been gone for months by this point, and with each passing day, her presence in my life felt more distant, more irrelevant. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets about her from mutual acquaintances, a rumor about how she was struggling to hold down a job, or a passing comment about how she'd been seen at a bar alone. It didn't spark anger or satisfaction anymore. She was just a memory now. Emily and I kept seeing each other, the connection deepening with each conversation, each shared moment. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, and I didn't want it to be. It was steady, honest, and real. One evening, as we sat on my back porch with a bottle of wine between us, she asked about Lauren. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said quickly, her tone careful. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "Lauren taught me a lot," I said finally. Not in the way she intended, but she did. She showed me what I don't want in a partner, what I won't tolerate, and what I deserve. Emily nodded, her hand resting lightly on mine. "And what do you deserve?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked at her, the answer clear. "This," I said, "something real." Lauren had once been my everything, the center of the life I thought I was building. Now, she was nothing more than a lesson. And as I sat there with Emily, the stars overhead and the future unfolding in front of me, I realized something I hadn't before. It wasn't Lauren's betrayal that had defined me. It was how I'd rebuilt myself in its wake. Emily became more than just someone I spent time with. She became a partner, someone who understood me in a way I didn't think was possible after everything I'd been through. She didn't press too hard or try to force things. She let me move at my own pace, letting trust build naturally. We didn't label what we had right away, and that was fine by me. After all, I wasn't looking for a replacement for what I'd lost. I was looking for something better, something honest. The house, once a monument to a failed marriage, now felt like a true home. With Emily's help, it had transformed into something warm, inviting, and entirely mine. She added little touches I hadn't thought of, plants in the corners, art on the walls, even a small herb garden in the backyard. It was no longer a reminder of the past. It was a celebration of how far I'd come. Lauren, on the other hand, was a ghost. The last I'd heard, she had moved again, something about starting fresh in a new city. Her social circle was gone, her reputation in shambles, and Jay had long since disappeared from her life. She hadn't tried to contact me since signing the divorce papers, and for that, I was grateful. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need apologies or explanations. Her chapter in my life was closed. The business continued to grow, thanks in no small part to Emily's creativity and insight. She wasn't just supportive. She became part of the team, her designs elevating our projects and attracting new clients. We worked well together, balancing each other's strengths. Clients loved the dynamic we brought, and I started to feel a sense of pride in what we were building, not just professionally, but personally. She wasn't just someone I cared about. She was someone I trusted. One evening, after finishing a long day at work, we sat on the back porch with beers in hand, watching the sunset. Emily leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice quiet. "Do you ever think about her?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. "No," I said after a moment. "Not anymore." She looked up at me, her expression soft. "Why not?" "Because she doesn't matter," I said simply. "She was just a lesson, and I've moved on." Emily smiled, her hand slipping into mine. "You've come a long way, Floyd." "So have you," I said, squeezing her hand lightly. We sat there in comfortable silence, the warmth of her presence grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. The best revenge wasn't what I'd done to Lauren. It wasn't exposing her lies, ruining her reputation, or watching her world crumble. The best revenge was this: a life rebuilt, a home filled with warmth, a future filled with possibilities. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. As the stars began to scatter across the sky, I realized something that had taken me months to understand. The betrayal, the pain, the anger, they were just stepping stones to something better. Lauren hadn't broken me. She'd set me free. So, what do you think about my story? Drop a comment with your thoughts on my decision and how you would have handled it.